Doubt is an interesting emotion, isn't it? When it comes to thinking about religious things and spiritual things and biblical things and about God, and we talk about doubt, and over the years, doubt has really been looked down on in the church, like, well, don't doubt, just believe. And for centuries, the Catholic Church, would withhold. Y'all don't worry about reading the Bible. I'm the professional. I'll tell you what it means, and you just believe. You just accept it, and you just move on with your life, and you just live it, and just kind of the way we go about life is don't question. Don't question, don't doubt, just believe. And while there's some truth to that, well, what do we do with our doubt? Because just because you don't talk about it, just because maybe you don't admit it, doesn't mean that it's not there, right? Sometimes it's just kind of lingering in the background. Sometimes it can influence our behavior. Sometimes we can, you sit out there and you hear me say something, you're like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. In doubt, there's this tension that exists with doubt. Tension between maybe what we're being told and what we think, or maybe what our experience is. And we can have this spiritual tug of war that's going on in our mind and our heart and our life about doubt. And I've been very open and very honest about some of the times in my life that I've had doubt. Going through, the times of homelessness, the times of being diagnosed with a learning disability. There were times, that Becky and I are like, man, are we going to make it? Are we going to get through this? Doubt is a powerful feeling and a powerful emotion. And then we get to feeling guilty because we have doubt. And we feel guilty because maybe we express doubt and we ask a question about our doubt. We're looking at this is the last week we're going through the questions that Jesus asked. And he asked this question, why did you doubt? So I want you to take your Bibles, and I want you to turn to the book of Matthew. It's a story that we all are very familiar with. It's not new. You've probably looked at this question before in this story, in this context. But in Matthew chapter 14, we have Jesus walking on water, and we have Peter walking on water, and we have this whole big story that happens in this storm. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 14. We're going to read verses 22 through 33 together. All right, so I want you to get out your Bibles. I want you to get your phones. There's some good stuff in here. We're going to refer to some things that aren't going to be up on the screen. So if you have your phone, if you have your Bible, it'd be really good for you to be able to take a look at it, all right? So Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. There's some really interesting stuff that goes on in this story. If you notice that the story starts out and it says immediately after this. Well, you have to refer back to what happened right before this to know what's going on. So in the context of this story, when Jesus immediately tells them to get into the boat, it follows the feeding of the 5,000. So you have this story where all the people are around. There's 5,000 men, because women and children don't count. So we just count men. So there's 5,000 men plus women and children. So who knows, 10, 15,000 people there. The disciples see this great miracle. They see this great thing that they're a part of. This huge mountaintop, this huge, exciting, rejuvenating thing that they see, and they're all excited. You can imagine after the story, after everybody's done eating, and the disciples are high-fiving each other, they're chest bumping, they're pounding their fists, and they're just stoked. And it says immediately after this, Jesus tells them, get in the boat. Get in the boat. I'm sure there was a lot of confusion and wondering in their mind about what's going on, about why are you doing this? So in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, you have this, it ends on a very high note. It ends in a very exciting way with all of these people eating, and the disciples, they had their baskets, and they were stuffed, and they were happy, and they were thrilled, and they just couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But how did the story start out? The story starts out, if you look back to the beginning of the story of feeding the 5,000, it starts out with doubt, doesn't it? If you look back up here, it says, Jesus says, or the disciples say, well, send them home. We're going to, so they can go get something to eat. This is in chapter 14. Go up just a few verses in verse 15 and 16. But Jesus says, you feed them. What's the disciples' response? Okay. Here we got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but that certainly isn't going to do. We can't raise enough money to do this. The story begins with them in doubt. The story begins with Jesus asking them to do something, telling them to do something. The story begins with them having doubt. We can't do this. This is impossible. So this is really a continuation of events from the feeding of the 5,000 into the story of Jesus walking on the water and Peter walking on the water. There are 3 different types of doubt I want to share with you this morning. I read this article this week that breaks it down into these 3 primary types of doubt that we each have. The first type of doubt is factual doubt. Factual doubt simply means this type of doubt arises from questioning the factual foundations of a belief or proposition. It stems from a lack of information or evidence. That makes sense, right? We just don't have enough information. I don't have all the facts, and so I'm doubting what you're saying. It's, I just don't have enough information. I don't have the facts. It's a factual doubt. The second type of doubt is an emotional doubt. Emotional doubt is rooted in subjective feelings and psychological factors. Anxiety, depression, hurt, or anger can lead to doubts. When emotions cloud our judgment, we may struggle to trust or fully commit to a belief or decision. So this type of, our doubts are feelings driven, are emotions driven. Feelings lie, don't they? Feelings lie. We can feel a certain way, but they can lie about reality. So this lie of our feelings, anxiety, stress, worry, being uncomfortable, it can create doubt in our mind, but it's all feelings based, emotionally driven. It's not based in facts, it's based in emotion. It's the second type of doubt. Third type of doubt is volitional doubt. Now, volitional, it means just simply is a big fancy word meaning a choice. I choose. I'm making the choice. So volitional doubt means it emerges from the strength of our faith. It occurs when our faith is weak or immature. Sometimes we hesitate to believe or apply known truths due to uncertainty or unwillingness. So we have the facts. Our emotions are in check. We're not being emotional about this, but we're just not so sure. I'm not doubting the facts. I'm not doubting the information. I'm not doubting, but I'm just not so sure I'm going to choose I'm not sure I'm going to choose to believe. I'm going to doubt. I'm choosing to doubt. If you've read the autobiography of Billy Graham talks about this in his own personal volitional doubt. They had the facts, he had the emotions. He started out with a man by the I think his name was George Templeton. George Templeton was older, was an evangelist. Billy Graham was kind of being mentored by him. And Templeton actually ended up leaving the faith, walking away and becoming an atheist. And I have Templeton's book on my shelf that he said saying goodbye to God, or I forget the title of the book, but it's something like saying goodbye to God. And Billy talks about this time in his life where he was at Bible college. He felt this calling on his life. There was some, the Bible doesn't remove all doubt, right? The Bible doesn't remove all questions, at least some things hanging out there, that it doesn't fill in all of the blanks. There is science in the Bible, but it doesn't answer. There is math in the Bible, but it doesn't answer. There's a lot of things that kind of are left hanging in the Bible. That's why we have Hebrews chapter 11, by faith you will know. Faith is being certain in the uncertain. That's faith. And Billy talks about the struggle that he had in his book. And he was out walking one day on the campus of his college, and he's praying, and he's searching, and he's just struggling with his faith. He's struggling with what happened with Templeton. He's struggling with I'm not sure. And he said in this moment of prayer, he decided to choose. He said, I decided to believe. I decided to choose and to believe that what the Bible says is true. I decided to believe and to choose what Jesus did for me and what he says he did for me is true, and I'm going to stake my life on that. That's volitional doubt. It's like, I'm going to set this aside because I'm simply making a choice. I have doubt. I had doubt. I'm going to choose to believe and choose to ignore that and to say, no, this is what I stake my life on. That's this type of doubt. That's this type of faith. I'm going to simply choose to believe. I'm going to choose how I'm going to live my life. The article of these 3 doubts sums it up this way. Remember that doubt is a natural part of the human experience. It can prompt us to seek answers, grow, and refine our understanding. Acknowledging doubt allows us to engage with our beliefs more deeply. I remember going to college, and I grew up a certain way and was taught a certain way and grew up in a certain faith tradition. And I went to college and I experienced a whole other group of, you grew up different, you don't believe, I didn't really associate with people who believed differently than me. And that they had grown up and they had come to different conclusions and they held different beliefs. And I remember my freshman year of college going there and thinking, well, what do I believe? This is what I was taught at home. This is what I was taught at church. I grew up and I was saying, well, that's what the church believes. This is what I believe. And I just kind of accepted it. Like I kind of started out. Here's the truth. You just believe it. You just accept it. You just do it. And I did. Well, now I get this experience of other people kind of questioning, kind of pushing back on that and challenging that. I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking, man, I've never heard this before. That sounds kind of good. That sounds kind of right. I'm not sure. And I remember going through this for several months of struggling about, what do I believe? And wrestling, but that's what doubt can do. Doubt causes us to wrestle. The summary of acknowledging doubt allows us to engage with our beliefs more deeply. And getting to the point where I say, okay, I've heard this. I know what I've been taught. You know what? This is what I'm going to choose. Because this is what I believe, and this is what I believe the Bible is teaching, and that what I was taught is right. Well, let's look at Peter. Look at the story of Peter here. There's some things I want to kind of walk through in the text here. First of all, it says in verse 22, after this, Jesus insisted. So remember, this is the high experience. There's the good stuff that's happening. There's the excitement of the moment. And in this celebration, in this joy, it says Jesus insisted. The Greek term literally implies force behind it. If you look at the definition on the screen, that Jesus almost like herding cats. By threats, the word literally means. By threats, by acts, by force, he makes them get in the boat. So there's this excitement thing, and Jesus says, hey, knock it off, get in the boat. Oh, but Jesus, I said get in the boat. Now. And this is Jesus. This is not a gentle, hey guys, come on, let's go. Come on. Hey, I want you to do that. No. There is a force behind him insisting that they get in the boat. By definition of the word, it could entail threats. So you see the emphasis of Jesus has and the passion that Jesus has. And I'm sure there's just all kinds of confusion going on in the disciples' heads about what in the world? What's stuck in his craw? That's an old expression. I don't know if you know, stuck in his craw. It's kind of okay. Some of you do. Some people are like, I don't know. I'm not going to explain it. But what's he got a burr under his saddle? I mean, we just had this great experience. You just did this great thing. And he's insisting, he's forcing us into the boat. What's going on? So he gets him in the boat. They get in the boat. They go out in the lake. Now, if you do a Google image of the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee sits in a bowl of mountains surrounding it. And the mountains come right down to the water. And the Sea of Galilee actually sits below sea level. It's the second lowest lake in the world. What's the lowest lake? Dead Sea. So this whole region is very low. Sea of Galilee sits below sea level. Going across at the widest point of the Sea of Galilee is only about 8 miles. So it's not a very big lake. So you have these mountains that surround the Sea of Galilee. Sits in a bowl. Storms would whip up very quickly in this area. Because it's below sea level, you have the wind coming over the mountains. In any direction, the Sea of Galilee can get whipped up where the water can actually come into a foam. It can be so tumultuous. So Jesus sends them out, and I think Jesus knew that a storm was coming. I'm certain that Jesus knew a storm was coming. He makes him get into the boat, and what's he do? He goes up onto the hills to pray. He goes back up into the hills. So again, if you were to Google image the Sea of Galilee, you can see Jesus sitting up on the mountain, sitting up on these hills, looking down and seeing his disciples in the boat. He can see them rowing. Now, to row across these boats would have one main sail, would have one small sail to help, but they were oar-powered. So the disciples are in the boat, straining against the wind and the waves, crashing over. They're soaking wet. Scared, tired. They'd been at this for hours. It says 3 o'clock in the morning. He probably put them on the boat around 9 o'clock. So 6 hours-ish. They're rowing, tired, sore, scared. Where's Jesus? Are we going to make it? These guys are professional fishermen. They should have been able to row across the lake in a couple hours. Easy. But here they are, and Jesus sends them into this. He insists that they head into the storm, and Jesus is up there, and it says he's praying. It doesn't say what he's praying about. What I think he's doing, I think he's praying for the disciples. I think he's praying for this experience. I think he's praying about what just happened. I think he's praying about what they're going to, and what's going to happen next. So he insists. He forces them. He forces this confrontation. He forces them into the storm. He forces this interaction that's coming here in just a little bit of him walking on the water. He's creating and setting up this scenario. And then it says, so Peter, they see Jesus, they kind of freak out. Peter does, what would possess a man to say, hey, let me come to you? Walking on the water. I don't think that would be a first question I would ask. Hey, but Peter saw where Jesus was, and Peter knew that the safest place to be was where Jesus was. He knew what was happening in the boat. And I like how the NLT puts it here as Peter goes over the side. I mean, this doesn't look like anything that's gracious at all, graceful. He just launches himself out of the boat into the water and walks out towards Jesus. Look at verse 30. Verse 30, it says, Peter saw. Peter saw the wind and the waves. At first he saw Jesus, then he sees the wind and the waves, and it literally means to have understanding of. Peter gets out there and he's looking at Jesus, he's walking and he's doing this amazing thing. And then he begins to get sidetracked. And it's not that he had forgotten about the water. I mean, he's still wet. He's still soaked. He's still tired. But he begins to understand the situation. Oh, I'm out in the middle of a lake. I could drown. Oh, these waves are huge. This wind is strong. And he gets his eyes off of Jesus. He begins to have understanding of his surroundings and understanding of the situation. And when he loses his faith and this doubt begins to creep into it and take hold of his mind, take hold of his behavior, that's when Peter gets in trouble. And he sinks. Jesus asks the question in verse 31, why did you doubt? See, here Jesus is building up to this. Remember, he sends them into the storm. He's orchestrating this interaction with his disciples. Why did you doubt? Simply means to waver. This Greek word is only used twice in the whole New Testament. Matthew uses it a second time at the Great Commission. So at the end of Jesus' ministry, it says that in chapter 28, I think it's around verse 16, verse 17 and 28, where it says they believed, but some doubted. Some were still wavering. And it's not this factual doubt. Jesus had established who he was. It's not this emotional doubt that they were all stressed and they were all worried and they were all concerned and anxiety. It was a volitional doubt. What am I going to do? Jesus has proven himself. The facts are not in doubt anymore. I'm not stressed about this. I'm not anxious about this. I just don't know if I can commit myself to this. I just don't know. This is Matthew chapter 28. Jesus asks Peter the same thing. Why did you waver? You were walking on water. You saw me walking on water. You just saw me feed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 pieces of bread. Facts are not in doubt. You weren't stressed. You weren't anxious for these last, I don't know how far Jesus was away from the boat. 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet, I don't know. You weren't stressed. You were doing something incredible. So why did you waver, Peter? Why did you choose, volitional, why did you choose to get your eyes off of me and start looking at the storm? Why did you make this choice, Peter? It's your choice that's the problem. Why did you, Peter, why? Why did you doubt? Why did you waver? You made a bad choice. Immediately he picks Peter up. They walk back to the boat together. They get in the boat. Immediately the storm stops. Immediately the storm stops. You see how this story is now connected between the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on the water, where this doubt that began at the feeding of the 5,000. See, Jesus wasn't done with that. It's like, okay, give me the fish, give me the bread. I'm going to feed these 5,000 people. But he hasn't forgotten about the doubt. The disciples kind of forgot about the doubt. Now he's exposing it again in the storm. There was the calm, but now it's in the storm that he's exposing their doubt, and he's confronting them about their doubt. He's confronting them about their choice and what they're going to do. I've presented you with the facts of who I am. What are you going to do, and what are you going to choose about me now, Peter? Rest of you 11. What are you going to do? So he's orchestrating, he's created the scenario now where you have to deal with this doubt. And he asks the question, why did you waver, Peter? Why did you make this choice? Why did you doubt? Look at what happens. Verse 31. This is what you need to underline. This is what you need to note. Not 31, sorry. 33. Verse 33, so 32, they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. So, Sea of Galilee is now dead calm. Disciples are still wet. They're still cold. It's still dark. It's still the middle of the night. They're still tired. All this emotion is still present, and they see all of this, and what do they choose to do? It says, then the disciples worshiped him. This is what you need to underline. And you need to write in the margin, This is the first worship service in the New Testament. This is the first time the disciples worshiped Jesus. In this storm, in this moment, in this scenario that Jesus creates to deal with their doubt and to deal with their choices. And guys, what are you going to do? Are you going to choose to worship, or are you going to choose to sink? Are you going to choose to walk on the water, or are you going to sink? Are you going to choose to follow me? First worship service. This is powerful stuff. Because the disciples saw who Jesus was, and they choose to worship Him in the boat. There's water in the bottom of this boat. They're ankle deep in it, knee deep in it. They've been bailing. And everything kind of fades away. Church, same thing happens in our life. It's easy on the mountaintops. It's easy to worship when we feel good. It's easy to worship when life is going well. It's easy to be happy when we've just seen 5,000 people fed. It's easy when our stomachs are full. But man, when we're in the storm, that doubt starts to creep in, the waves are crashing over, the boat's filling up, the night is dark. These guys literally couldn't see the hand in front of their face if it wasn't for the lightning. And then the lightning brings a whole new set of terrors, right? In our life, we have storms. We have fears. We have emotions. Sometimes we lack information. We lack facts. What are you going to choose to do? How are you going to choose to respond in the storm? Because the reality is that our faith doesn't grow on the mountaintops. The disciples didn't worship after the feeding of the 5,000. They didn't worship after dinner. They worshiped sitting in a sinking boat, wet, cold, and tired, when God showed up. God was with them on the mountaintop too, wasn't He? He was with them in the great experience. He was with them in the good times. But it's in the storm that the disciples worship Him. Because that's what they chose to do. They had doubt, but they chose to set all that aside because He had presented the facts to them. And I'm going to worship Him. I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the information. But we will worship. One of the things, if you look back up at verse 27. Look back up at verse 27. So in 26, when the disciples saw Him walking on the water, they were terrified. Makes sense. They were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" I mean, I have a hard time blaming these guys. I mean, who has ever seen anybody walking on water before? It's not something that they would expect to see. So they're freaking out. What does Jesus immediately do when He hears and He sees their fear? He speaks into the fear. And He says, "Don't be afraid. Take courage, I am here." He immediately speaks into the fear. And He does the same thing for us. Storms are going on in our life. He speaks into our fear. He speaks into our storms. He says, "Hey, I'm here. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Let me show you who I am." That doubt that you had, let's talk about that. Let's not just talk about it. Let me show you. And how God shows up in the storm. And it's in the storm that the disciples worship. It is so easy in our doubt. It is so easy in our fear to lash out. And I think that's what happens a lot today in the church. That we don't have questions, we don't have answers, and so we lash out. We want the facts. We want all the information. I think it's one of the negatives that we live in our day and age, where information is at your fingertips. I mean, you can Google anything, can't you? And it's like instantly, I can't snap, instantly, we get the information. You can ask it any dumb thing. It's like, who's sitting on the other side of my screen answering this question? It's just something I can't fathom. I just don't understand where all this information is coming from. Is there a storeroom? Is there a group of someplace, people sitting at a computer? How do they know the answer to? I don't know. Any question we can think to ask, it's there. And I think sometimes we translate what we have in our daily life, we translate that and we transfer that to God. We want the same information from Him. And God, we want to avoid the storm. We want to avoid the lightning and the thunder. We don't want to struggle. We don't want to work. We don't want the hard. But God orchestrated all of that. But Jesus was watching and He was praying and He was involved. He wasn't distant. Because He needed to confront a weakness in their life. He needed them to make a choice. Okay, guys, what are you going to do? You just saw this great thing, but you were doubting before that. Peter, why did you doubt? Why did you waver? Why weren't you sure? Why did you make this choice? See, church, I think the same question is asked of us. It's easy to get angry at Jesus when we're in the storms. It's easy. But I think He frequently orchestrates the storms so that He can reveal Himself to us through them, and so that we can encounter Him in a powerful way. How do you think this story, this scenario, how do you think this interaction impacted the rest of their life? They were different after this, every one of them. They saw Jesus for who He was and they worshiped Him. First time ever, they worshiped Him. I can't help but think that the disciples would look back on this and think, man, it was worth it. It was so worth it to go through that storm, to see Jesus for who He was. Guys, you remember how cold we were? Remember how scared we were? And Jesus showed up, and we saw Him. And then the storm was just absolutely calm. Church, I think the same thing is true in our life. That there are storms, and the storms aren't haphazard. The storms aren't without purpose. The storms aren't without a plan. There's this C.S. Lewis quote that I love. You might want to write down. God whispers in our pleasures, but shouts in our pains. God whispers to us in our pleasure, but shouts to us in our pain. And that's what Jesus is doing here in the story. He was kind of whispering in the pleasure, the story before this, the feeding of the 5,000. He was kind of whispering about, no, you do it. You guys do it. Now in the storm, you read through there and He is shouting to them, don't be afraid. Take courage, I'm here. He's shouting in their pain. He was just whispering, now He's shouting, and they hear this message of I'm here, and they worship Him. If you're hurting today, if you're struggling today, if you're doubting today, I believe Jesus wants to shout to you in your pain. I believe that He is speaking into your storm. He's speaking into your pain. And He's saying, take courage, don't be afraid, I'm here. Why didn't you see us on the mountaintop? Why didn't you experience? I don't know. But we grow, our faith grows in the valleys. Our faith grows through the storms. Our faith doesn't grow on the mountaintops. It grows in the storms. And so yes, storms are vital. Storms are necessary. And many times, oftentimes, God orchestrates those storms in our life so that He can reveal Himself to us and so that our faith can grow and so that we can experience Him and worship Him. How you doing, church? How's your faith? How's your doubt? It's okay to doubt. It's okay. The Bible doesn't remove all questions. It doesn't remove all doubt, but it gives us the facts and it gives us the information. And we have eyewitness testimony that Jesus is who He said He is. We're going to close the service. And I'm going to say it again. I know these questions that we've talked about, the questions that Jesus asked, a lot of them are mirrors to our life, and they're not easy questions. He doesn't ask the easy questions. And for me, it's been a difficult series because, man, there's some stuff that you have to struggle with and stuff questions you got to, wrestle for those answers. And it's hard. And some of you may be carrying some doubt around and wondering and just, Jesus, where are you? What's going on? What's happening? Why is this? Why are you doing this? Why am I going through this? What will you choose to do? How will you choose to respond? Because it simply does come back to choice. I want to close. I think I have this last quote up there, Jessica. Do I have one more? Okay, I have it in my notes. I didn't. Sure. To have the certainty of God, which we all want, right? We all want the certainty of God. To have the certainty of God requires we risk the vulnerability of trust. When you trust somebody or something, there is a risk in that because you don't know how they're going to respond. Remember the first time you told somebody, I love you? Oh, thank you. Man, there's a risk, there's a vulnerability in trust. What's going to happen? What am I going to do? What happens at I don't know. But to have the certainty of God requires we risk the vulnerability of trust. Will you be vulnerable and trust God that your storm, that your doubt is in control and that He is still God? And will you worship Him in your storm? Don't wait for Him to fix the storm. Don't wait for Him to stop. In your storm, will you stop and worship Him for who He is? Will you make that choice? Let's stand and let's sing the song. The altars are always open if you'd like to come and pray. If you want to sit and pray, that's fine too. If you want to read through this story again and say, Lord, maybe you need to do some repenting of your doubt. Allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you in your doubt and let Him shout to you in your pain this morning.